Picking up from the previous chapter, Shen Lang demanded that Lan Dian memorize 5,000 characters in the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, a seemingly impossible feat. Yet, Lan Dian managed to remember every single word. As expected, a talent handpicked by Shen Lang was no ordinary person. However, Lan Dian couldn't help but worry about his brothers. While he himself possessed this superhuman memory, what chance did his crippled comrades have in any competition? Shen Lang immediately put his worries to rest. Li Dengok Big Idiot proved that while ordinary people must train in either literature or martial arts, for Shen Lang, anything was possible. Meanwhile, the insidious Chiu Zhaoyan secretly poisoned Ku Tihuan. In agony, spitting up blood, he cried out in confusion, "Why use poison? You could have killed me with your sword." Then he screamed in despair, "Kill me with your own hands, end my life yourself. It seems dying for a woman is truly a bitter end. I gave you my love, and you played me for a fool." His wish was granted. With a cold expression, Chiu Zhaoyan drew her sword and plunged it straight into his chest. Blood gushed out like rain, but that was just the external wound. The wound in his heart was the most painful. The merciless blade was gently pulled from his body. Ku Tuan staggered, tears of blood streaming down his face. Just then, Chiu Zhaoyan spoke with cold contempt, "Useless trash. Die." With that, she kicked him decisively, sending him plunging into the raging river below. His fate was left to the currents, with death being the most likely outcome. Would a miracle save him? From above, Chiu Zhaoyan watched as his body sank and disappeared into the water. She felt no pity, even laughing triumphantly. Haha, the cheapest things in this world are brainless brutes. Stupid, yet they try to act tough. An unknown amount of time passed. 20 miles downstream on the Nujim River, Li Tangyu was steering his raft when he spotted a body floating in the water. Without hesitation, he used a pole to pull the corpse onto his raft. It was Ku Tihuan, his face purple and bruised. Li Tangyu examined him and thought, no heartbeat, no breath. Is he really dead? Shen Lang had once said, if they're alive, I want to see the person. If they're dead, I want to see the body. With that in mind, Li Tangyu wasted no time, carrying Ku Tihuan's body through rivers and forests back to the capital. At the same time, the Chu Kingdom's diplomatic mission had been in the capital of the Yu Kingdom for over a month, with negotiations dragging on endlessly. Every day, both sides exchanged verbal jabs, their words faster than bullets, yet the result was a big zero. To be fair, the Chu Kingdom was on the losing side of the recent conflict, but they acted as if they were in charge, demanding the Yu Kingdom admit fault. In the recent Three Kingdom conflict, the Wu Kingdom suffered the most, losing over 40,000 soldiers and an untold number of civilians. The Chu Kingdom, while seemingly less affected, had also suffered enough to make their king spit blood. Their efforts to support the Su clan's rebellion had come to nothing with the death of Su Nan, and a decade's worth of trade concessions were lost. With the Wu and Yu kingdoms now allied, the Chu Kingdom was on the defensive. The Yu Kingdom pressed its advantage, demanding not only the return of occupied lands but also two additional conditions. First, a public apology from the Chu Kingdom, and second, compensation of 3 million gold coins. These were terms the Chu Kingdom could never accept, leading to a stalemate. When the negotiations were at their most tense, someone from the palace asked if Shen Lang wanted to join the delegation. He couldn't be bothered, the matter could drag on for years. His entire focus was on Lan Dian and the others. By now, the whole capital knew that Shen Lang had not only recruited 11 crippled beggars but was also making them take the autumn civil service examination, insisting they all pass. This absurd news once again caused a stir. This madman can't sit still. People gossip. A beggar taking the imperial exam. Hilarious, the capital's exam candidates were the best of the best. For someone like Lan Dian, who had never studied, to compete and pass seemed impossible. If he and those 10 other beggars all pass, one person declared, I'll eat 10 pounds of dung for the world to see. Not only the common people but also the royal court was in an uproar. Every day, censors submitted memorials impeaching Shen Lang and the monarch, Ning Zheng. They argued that allowing beggars to take the exam was an insult to the sages and demanded that Shen Lang be punished and the 11 beggars expelled. The king, Ning Yuangxian, though annoyed by the daily complaints, calmly waved them off, postponing the discussion while silently cursing Shen Lang for causing him so much trouble. However, Shen Lang was incredibly busy. He spent his days in a secret chamber, researching blood and goo insects. I've run 1,700 experiments, he thought, holding a sample. It seems there's only one final step. Meanwhile, Lan Dian memorized books, poems, and essays daily, retaining everything after a single reading. He would finish his studies in just 3 hours and spend the rest of his day relaxing. This baffled a bookworm like Jin Mudong, who couldn't understand how Lan Dian could be so carefree. When not studying, Lan Dian would flirt with Han Nu, read miscellaneous books, or practice fortune-telling. Jin Mudong was particularly disgusted by Lan Dian's taste in women. There were beautiful female slaves in the guard detail, Yet he was interested in Han Nu, who was fat and unattractive. Once, Jin Needham bluntly asked him, Lan Dian, why do you like Han Nu? Your taste is strong. Lan Dian calmly replied, in your eyes, she is a 280-pound Han Nu. In my eyes, she is the future 130-pound Han Nu, a stunning, untouched beauty. It's called investing in potential. Understand? Jin Needham was skeptical. Han Nu would probably never want to lose weight. It would weaken her combat strength. Lan Dian said confidently, for the one she loves, she will be willing to change. Han Nu, overhearing, chimed in your dreams, I'll never notice you. You're too young and naive. 2 days later, while Shenlang was sleeping with Xiaobing, an urgent voice called out, young master, the Sword King has returned. Shenlang sat up. Xiaobing sleepily asked what was wrong. It's nothing, he reassured her, go back to sleep. He dressed and went outside. In the secret chamber, Li Tangqiu had placed Ku Tuhuan's body on a bed. It's strange, the Sword King said. There's no breath, no heartbeat, but the body hasn't decomposed for days. Shenlang immediately took out a needle to test for poison. After confirming the potent poison, he used his X-ray vision to examine the body. The sword wound was right over the heart, but Ku Tuhuan's heart was on the opposite side. His organs were mirrored. Shenlang knew then that Ku Tuhuan was actually Jiu Yichin, a martial arts prodigy who passed the exam at 18. Due to a physical transformation, he was taken to the Tanya Hage for treatment and became a disciple because of his outstanding bloodline talent. He left to avenge his family, and ended up in his current state. Young master, is he really Ku Tuhuan? Han Nu asked, her voice full of admiration. Yes. You admire him? Shenlang replied. Of course, she said. Whether as a martial champion, or a great thief, he reached the pinnacle. He's a legend. Is he truly dead? I don't know, Shenlang said, thinking to himself that although Ku Tuhuan's brain should be dead, his unique bloodline might be sustaining it. Can you save him? Li Tangqiu asked impatiently. Shenlang took out a test tube. I'm 80% sure, he said seriously. For the past 6 months, Shenlang's research into Gu insects and Big Idiot's golden bloodline had led to a new, endlessly regenerating energy source. The only problem was a neurotoxin. However, by crossbreeding these insects with a strain from the Sword King's body, he had created a non-toxic version capable of transforming a human's bloodline. Experiments on death row inmates had all failed, with the subjects being drained dry and exploding. His experiment was 99.99 complete. Ku Tuhuan was the perfect final test subject. If he could be saved, the same method could be used on the 10 beggars to awaken their bloodlines. Without hesitation, Shenlang injected the substance into Ku Tuhuan's body. Ku Tuhuan, he thought, the final 0.1 of this experiment is up to you. Minutes passed with no reaction. Ku Tuhuan remained motionless. Shenlang, be patient, Li Tangqiu said reassuringly. It might take a few hours to see any effect. But Shenlang, observing with his special vision, knew something was wrong. The Gu insects were active, multiplying, and excited, yet the host showed no response. Did it fail? He wondered. Failure meant not only losing Ku Tuhuan, but also redoing many experiments, and missing the deadline for the imperial examinations. But just then thump, 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 a powerful, steady heartbeat rang out. The heart in Ku Tuhuan's chest suddenly began to beat violently. Continuing from the last episode, Ku Tuhuan became the unwilling guinea pig for Shenlang. The final 0.1 of the bloodline activation and modification experiment was entrusted to him. Ironically, minutes later, he remained completely still, not moving a muscle. Shenlang grew incredibly anxious. Failure was not an option. If this failed, not only would Ku Tuhuan be lost, but numerous other experiments would have to be restarted, and he would miss this year's grace examination. Just then, Ku Tuhuan's heart suddenly began to beat again. A miracle had truly happened. Li Tangqiu and Shenlang, jaws dropped in disbelief, stared at Ku Tuhuan's twitching body. A second later, both of them beamed with joy. Holy crap, he's alive. He's really alive. It was unbelievable that Shenlang had actually pulled Ku Tuhuan back from the brink of death. This was beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Shenlang turned to Li Tangqiu and asked, Sword King Senior, where do you think the Gu insects from Fuji Mountain came from? Did they raise them themselves? Li Tangqiu replied, no, they were almost certainly excavated from the ancient world. Hearing this, Shenlang thought to himself, oh, ancient. No wonder the master of the evil Bramble Pavilion abandoned the Sky Sea Pavilion, and crossed the sea in search of ancient ruins. No wonder the temple mobilizes vast amounts of manpower and resources every year during the Great Calamity just to search for ancient civilizations. Finding one means a new power will rise like a storm. Of course, the master of the evil Bramble Pavilion wasn't necessarily driven by ambition. Perhaps he was simply a man lost in his fascination with that ancient world. Li Tangqiu asked again, so when will he wake up? Shenlang smiled, probably in 2 or 3 days. Hutuhuan's heartbeat had returned and his breathing slowly stabilized, but he remained in a deep coma. Shen Lang used his X-ray vision to peer into his blood vessels, seeing countless golden-blooded goo insects darting around like lightning. They tirelessly rebuilt, restored, multiplied, and divided, as if reconstructing an entire collapsed body from scratch. While Shen Lang's experiment was more than halfway successful, back in the palace, no one believed he could accomplish anything. Consort Bayan had fully recovered and for 4 or 5 days had been inviting Ningzhen to the palace, not to discuss politics, but simply to share a meal. Zhenger, Consort Bayan began, there are only 35 days left until the civil grace examination, and 39 days until the military exam. Does mother need to find a great scholar to teach that mad Lan? It's better to cram at the last minute than to do nothing. She had heard that Mad Lan rarely touched the 4 books and 5 classics at Ningzhen's residence. He was either buried in novels like Battle Through the Heavens or engrossed in various other stories, even showing interest in fortune-telling books. Starting to study for the exams now was obviously too late, but he should at least pretend to make an effort for appearance's sake. A last-ditch effort was better than facing complete embarrassment during the exams. Ningzhen respectfully cupped his hands. Thank you, Mother Consort, but it's not necessary. Shen Lang is teaching Lan personally. Consort Bayan was speechless, thinking to herself that Shen Lang, that troublemaker, was hardly a reliable figure when it came to examinations. He had failed the scholar exam, and his title of provincial graduate had been scammed from His Majesty. And now he dreamed of tutoring others. No, it was more accurate to say the king's words at the time were about blackmail and extortion, even more high level than a common scam. Thinking about it, Shen Lang really wasn't wrong. When he was sent as an envoy to the Khan Kingdom, his rank couldn't be too low. A student of the Imperial College was clearly not enough, so he insisted the king grant him a degree. He initially wanted a doctorate, but Ning Yuanxian couldn't grant that, reluctantly bestowing him the title of provincial graduate. Since then, Shen Lang had become the shame of the examination system, and now he was pretending to teach others. Consort Bayan sigh. I heard those 10 candidates for the military exam haven't hired a martial arts instructor either. They don't practice riding or archery and just spend all day at home eating, drinking, and boasting. Is that right? Ningzhen didn't know how to respond, because his mother was absolutely right. The 10 Begars had been in his residence for 10 days and hadn't practiced martial arts once, nor had they even tried riding a horse. Shen Lang had tested them once, and the results were disastrous. Forget archery, none of the 10 could even climb onto a horse's back. Even with the war horses standing perfectly still, their twisted, semi-disabled bodies couldn't manage to mount. When they tried drawing a bow, the situation was even worse. Forget it. 1 stone bow. None could even draw a half-stone bow. These past few days, the 10 men lived as they always had, eat, sleep, wake up, eat again, and then lie around boasting all day. They exaggerated to the point of absurdity, fabricating stories about anything and everything. One claimed to know a peerless beauty, another said a city lord's daughter was so infatuated she wanted to marry him, but he, with his unyielding integrity, refused, casting aside wealth and glory for freedom. In reality, among the group, only Mad Lan was a true scoundrel, at least he had slept with women, and quite a few at that. The other 10 were virgins, yet whenever they opened their mouths, they transformed into seasoned veterans of the bedroom. In their stories, lasting less than 2 hours was a disgrace. Of course, no one dared to brag about size, as they were all too familiar with each other's. And though the truth was that Mad Lan had never lasted more than 5 minutes, he shamelessly boasted of going for 4 hours straight. Seeing Ningzhen's troubled expression, Consort Bayan could only sigh. What on earth are those 2 Shen boys playing at? Jenner, it's fine not to contend for the throne. Living a peaceful life and doing what you love is far more precious. It was clear Consort Bayan had completely lost hope in Shen Lang. Ningzhen was at a loss for words. Consort Bayan tilted her head, a hint of impatience in her voice. Where is His Majesty? He still hasn't arrived. A eunuch replied, Your Highness, he is still reviewing memorials. Consort Bayan knew full well that the king disliked Ningzhen. Every time she tried to create an opportunity for the father and son to eat together and talk, the king would absolutely not show up as long as Ningzhen was there. No matter how hungry he was, he would stay in his study, claiming to be busy reviewing memorials. Reviewing what? Ning Yuanxian was hardly a diligent monarch. He merely glanced at most memorials before tossing them to the Grand Secretariat, who would filter out the important ones and present them with final recommendations for his decision. The king simply didn't want to be in the same room as Ningzhen. After finishing his meal, Ningzhen quietly stood up to leave. I am full, Mother Consort. I will visit again in a few days. Consort Bayan didn't see him off, only watching him with a gentle gaze. In her eyes, there was no need for excessive ceremony between mother and son. Sure enough, less than 15 minutes after Ningzhen left, the king appeared. Consort Bayan shot him a look filled with reproach. Ning Yuanxian gave a forced smile. My apologies, I was truly busy. You've been reviewing memorials for hours. Yes, I'm sure only you know what you were busy with in your head. He held that last memorial for half an hour, over 200 words, and still couldn't finish it. Are you practicing reading at a pace of 1 word every 3 minutes? Consort Bayan sighed helplessly, then instructed the young eunuch to bring out food for the king. It was then she realized that her husband's shamelessness and laziness were just like Shen Ling's. Consort Bayan forced a smile. Please wait a moment, I'll go prepare a few more dishes. Meanwhile, after his heart restarted, Kutuwan remained in a coma for 3 days and 3 nights. In his dreams, his past flashed before him like a fast-forwarded film. As a child, he fled to the Yu kingdom and was adopted by the Chuo family. He showed a talent for martial arts, rising from a lowly grunt to an adopted son. But his adoptive father never truly loved him, forcing him to train daily while forbidding him from learning to read. Moreover, every day, his adoptive father would brainwash him, repeating, "Everything you have was given to you by the Chuo family. You must be loyal and risk your life for the Chuo family for the rest of your life." At the time, Shuo Yichin didn't understand why his adoptive father wouldn't let him read. He naively believed the old man's words that reading was useless, and that time was better spent on martial arts. Only later did he realize the truth. His adoptive father wanted to keep him ignorant. In the old man's eyes, those who read too much would think too much, and those who thought for themselves were difficult to keep blindly loyal. There was one thing Shuo Yichin remembered vividly. Initially, Chuo Jiaoyan was cold and dismissive towards him, looking at him as nothing more than a servant. But during a period when he grew listless and his martial arts progress stagnated, his adoptive father, Shuo Guanbo, tried everything to no avail. It was then that Chuo Jiaoyan appeared before him like a little angel, her smile radiant, playful, and intimate. From that moment, Shuo Yichin fell deep into her trap. Now, he realized it as if waking from a dream. Shuo Jiaoyan's closeness and intimacy were all intentional. From beginning to end, she had never truly liked him, never even truly seen him. In her eyes, he was always just a servant, not an adopted brother. As the dream shifted to his time at the Sky Sea Pavilion, some memories became sharper while others faded. The master of the evil Bramble Pavilion, who was his master, appeared hazy in his dream. Kutuwan couldn't recall his face. The master had 2 disciples, Princess Ninghan and Zhu Hongxu. He had only met Zhu Hongxu, never Ninghan. Yet, the days spent reading at the Sky Sea Pavilion were crystal clear, especially the times he was harshly scolded and beaten by his scholarly teacher. Every scene was vivid, yet strangely filled with joy. Yes, his time at the Sky Sea Pavilion was the warmest and happiest of his life. No schemes, no self-interest, no deceit. Though his scores in mathematics and literature were abysmal and he was scolded daily, the pure feeling of learning brought him immense joy. Every 15 minutes there felt like breathing the air of freedom. Moreover, during that time, he spent less than 4 hours a day practicing martial arts, yet his skills improved by leaps and bounds, much faster than during the grueling days at the Jiuo family estate. But one day, that joy came to an abrupt end. The Jiuo clan was annihilated. Shuo Yichin was forced to leave behind his happy days at the Sky Sea Pavilion, carrying the heavy burden of revenge and protecting Jiuo Jiaoyan. Next, his memories shifted to his time as the bandit Kutuwan. An instinctive revulsion washed over him, as if he didn't want to touch anything related to it. But these memories were too recent, flooding back without effort. The images swirled faster and faster, like a reel on fast forward, finally stopping at the last scene, Shuo Jiaoyan personally poisoning him. The sword in her hand was cold as it pierced his chest, her eyes devoid of emotion. Then, as if to end it all, she kicked him hard, sending him plummeting into the raging river. "You useless trash, just die. I was truly too cheap." Immediately after, he opened his eyes. He awoke with a start to find himself in an unfamiliar room. There was no one around, and his body felt incredibly light. Before, his entire being was shrouded in a heavy, oppressive energy. Now, his body was filled with a warm, comforting light. This familiar feeling was back. It was the same feeling he had while reading at the Sky Sea Pavilion, so comfortable. Kotuwan sat up and was stunned to realize there was no pain. For years, he had been tortured by a gnawing pain so severe that every breath was an agony. The pain originated from his organs, contorted his face, and ran deep within his blood vessels. It had become a part of his life, as inescapable as breathing. Yet now, that pain was completely gone, making him feel as if his whole body could fly. He intended to go outside, but suddenly noticed a large mirror in the room. Unable to resist, he walked over and froze instantly. Reflected in the mirror was the face of a man so handsome it was breathtaking. Kotuwan muttered in a daze, "Who is this handsome guy?" Kotuwan was ecstatic. Even in his delirium, he had been aware of his surroundings. He recognized that for so long, he had borne both physical and mental anguish. He had strength, but a twisted body. He had someone he loved, but was insecure about his appearance. He had tasted enough bitterness in life to call himself Kutehuan. Now, a 20-year nightmare was over. He was reborn. He joyfully dressed and walked outside, murmuring to himself, it's over. Ao the Chuo family nothing. Ao Chuo Joyan nothing. I'm free. He pushed open the door and stepped out. Autumn had arrived. The golden sunlight spread everywhere, warm but not harsh, gently caressing his skin. Some trees had begun to shed their leaves, which spun in the wind. Others were heavy with fruit, hanging in large clusters. The scenery was heart-stirringly beautiful. Aside from his years at the Sky Sea Pavilion, Xiu Yichin had almost never had the time or inclination to notice the scenery around him. Now, he could truly feel how beautiful the world was. But as he stepped into the courtyard, the sight that greeted him was enough to make one sigh. 10 bald heads were practicing martial arts, each with a body that was more or less twisted and deformed, as if they had just stepped out of a circus troupe. After more than 10 days of fooling around, had they finally remembered they were here to train. But wait, was this what you call training? In each man's hand was a 30 jin bao, the kind meant for children to practice with. Yet, none of them could manage to draw it properly. The correct stance for drawing a bao is to stand straight with a straight back. But these guys were practically lying on the ground to pull, looking more like they were having rocks. Ko Taekwon froze. This is martial arts training. How much does that bow weigh? Isn't that a child's practice bow? They had barely held the pose for a few minutes before cries were heard. Rest, rest, today was too hard, really difficult. Indeed, martial arts is torture. It's rare to find people as diligent as us. How about we change the rules from now on? Train for 15 minutes, rest for an hour and a half. An hour and a half. No, that's an odd number. Let's just rest for 2 full hours to round it off. Alright, it's settled then. 15 minutes of practice, 2 hours of rest. We are truly too hardworking. And so, the 10 beggars, after training for less than 15 minutes, collapsed onto the courtyard floor, lying sprawled for hours, continuing to boast and exaggerate their exploits as if they had just won 100 battles. Fu Taewon watched, feeling second-hand despair. At this rate, they might as well just give up. Just then, Shen Lang and Ning Zhen walked into the courtyard. The 10 beggars didn't even bother to look up, continuing to lie on the ground and brag as if no one was there, completely unafraid. It made sense, Shen Lang had always treated them too well. Then forbidding them from urinating wherever they pleased, he hardly managed them at all, even joining in their daily boasting sessions. The key was that his storytelling skills were so advanced he could make fish laugh in the pond. As for His Highness Ning Zhen, though he rarely smiled, he was short, dark, and mild-tempered, never getting angry, so they had even less reason to be wary. This group had been vagrants for 20 years, their minds long since turned lazy. Once they lost their sense of fear, you couldn't expect them to stand up and bow. Even propping themselves up was too much trouble. Young Master Shen, Fifth Highness, we greet you, our lords. Where's General Milan? Haven't seen her for over 2 hours. General Milan. Her butt is really round top-notch. At this moment, Ku Taewon walked up to Shen Lang, his expression a little strange. His heart was filled with gratitude for having his life saved, not just saved, but given a new one. Yet, Ku Taewon remained stubborn, refusing to open his mouth to say thank you. Shen Lang had to speak first. You're awake. Ku Taewon still said nothing. Shen Lang stepped forward and lightly punched his shoulder, saying slowly, you once spared Chu Kainkan's life. I remember that favor. But then you went to assassinate my father-in-law, so I punched you once. We're even. Ku Taewon was slightly surprised, thinking, is it settled just like that? Shen Lang narrowed his eyes, a smirk playing on his lips. Also, have you ever slept with Zhu Zhaoyan? Ku Taewon broke out in a cold sweat. What kind of question was this? Defeated, he replied, never. Shen Lang came closer and draped an arm over Ku Taewon's shoulders like they were sworn brothers, laughing. Haha, that's good, I am telling you, that woman might be poisonous. Sleep with her, and your little brother might fall off. Ku Taewon stood frozen, his mind in turmoil. Is this the infamous eccentricity of Shen Lang? Why is he so nosy? Then, Ku Taewon spoke. Seriously, what do you want me to do? Shen Lang said, from now on, how about we all eat from the same pot? Ku Taewon didn't hesitate, replying decisively, done. It's a deal.